I have heard Paul Goldberger speak before at East Hampton at the Guild Hall about architecture in East Hampton, and also at the Yale Club in honor of Robert A.M. Stern. Also, I was interested in hearing the lecture tonight because of the Skyline of Manhattan and what new, exciting architecture might be happening within the city, or are we stagnant? So I'm hoping with Mayor Bloomberg, and I know he has an initiative for modern architecture and star architects in the city of New York. I hope that we address that as part of the lecture. Thank you.
I work as a preservationist, but probably not as a preservationist who thinks that it's about embalming the city or freezing it or preserving it in amber. So I think it's important to discuss ways in which the city can change and ways in which we think about the future of the city.
Building diagonally across from here, the Setai Hotel, I guess it is, just went up by Watkins Siegel, that is slender. I haven't heard anybody complain about the fact that looking downtown is blocking the Empire State Building the way people were worried about the building to the west, because that is vast and bulky. And a lot of it, I think, does have to do with this issue of slenderness more than anything else.
I want to say something about the issue of architects. First of all, there's a problem about architecture. There are wonderful architects, but there's all this commercial stuff. And so we always have that problem talking about architects. Architects who understand the art of building and spiritual issues, and there are the others who are there to make a buck, okay? They roll up their sleeves, and somebody says, put up one arm and the other arm, and the other leg, and they fall on their butts. But that's really what happens. But I think that that's basically the role of the city. And I think the city has to, because the city zones, and the city could also say, can zone the way they did for Seagram, or no, not Seagram, but I mean, they never could zone for Seagram. Seagram did it itself. But then they said, okay, we want to do, it's called incentive zoning, okay? And I think that's, it allows these developers to make a buck, and it doesn't, there has to be without a consciousness. For example, when all that stuff, all those plazas were made, okay, after the zoning code of 1961, Holly White came up to the city and said, oh my God, look what you're getting. You're getting concrete open space with no amenities whatsoever, and there's no control over what people do there, okay? And so then the city said, okay, and they changed the laws. But there's a certain degree of greed that's possible, but we as a civil body have to control that.
Right.
And it seems
I think it's the city's job to be the referee in the basketball game.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that needs mentioning here today is that buildings and cities have a spiritual quotient to them, which moves people, and that is part of the reason they come here. People kill themselves to live on the island of Manhattan. They live in cockroach-infested tenement buildings by choice sometimes. If they're coming out of school, they don't have a choice. They stretch their budgets because they want to be here, because it stirs their souls, and because there are jobs. It's the combination. When they built the CIBC Tower on Madison and 42nd Street, that was an important new building, but for some reason, there's nothing on the street wall on Madison Avenue from 42nd to 41st Street. I don't know who made a decision like that, but that destroys the context, and that darkens my experience in a great city. I really think that the problem is that the practitioners have let us down. And I think one of the reasons, and this is anecdotal and something I think about, not something I've ever studied and researched, that preservation came about when it did in New York City with the advent of the landmarks preservation, is because people stopped trusting that the future was going to be better than the past. And we tore down the Waldorf Astoria to build the Empire State Building. Shreve, Lamb, and Harmon were great architects. They understood how to make a tall building look beautiful, even though there were many people who were afraid of it when it was built. But the problem is that they tore down Penn Station and they built Penn Plaza, Penn Plaza. And so I think that with the architects today, and going back into the 60s, lost the respect for context. And by and large, not 100%, but by and large, there were exceptions. They lost the respect for context, and they just didn't build buildings that were as good, that were as graceful, that were as spiritual, that were as qualitative as many of the things that had come before it. So people were afraid. And so we make these historic districts because we're afraid of what will happen if we don't preserve these buildings. Not necessarily because every single one of them is so fabulous and is worthy of preservation. And they come to different conclusions at different points in time. And if we have come to the conclusion that the Empire State Building is so iconic and so much loved by so many people that we can freeze the skyline around it, I personally don't have a problem with that. It isn't a problem with a new big building. The problem is that Cesar Pelli's proposed 15 and Plaza has no respect for the context of what it is changing. And it is all driven, in many cases, by ego, and in some cases by the bottom line. Now, as a real estate investor, the bottom line matters. I know that's important, but where is the respect for context? There is none. It's all about, I need to stand out. The skyscrapers all across Lower Manhattan all fit together as pieces of a puzzle.
I thought the lecture was wonderful. I think the different points of view each deserve to be debated at length. I'm wishing that I could not only stay now, but that they could further this lecture in another venue, which the preservation of the skyscraper, of the skyline, or the, as Kenneth was saying, building. I don't really know what I believe, because I think both points of view are extraordinarily powerful.